What's up, everybody? We've got some online lecture notes because we've been watching the movie all week. We need to make sure that we are ahead of the game and that we're talking about the right things when we talk about this movie, Hotel Rwanda. And one of the big things that is one of the underlying issues that you'll see in this movie are those people with blue hats. I think in the movie they even call them blue hats. And we're talking about the United Nations. In our movie, we saw the United Nations kind of bail on the people of Rwanda. Remember that general who said those kind of awful things to our main character was upset that they were leaving? Well, he was talking about the United Nations. And so what we need to know is what the heck is the United Nations? And the United Nations is, and you're going to need to write this on a brand new set of notes, called supranational organizations. Not supernational. No, not supernatural, because that's Halloween. See, good notes today. I should probably start over, but I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna roll with it. And a supranational organization is really simply just a project or policy that is planned and controlled by a group of nations. It's any idea or plan that multiple nations or states get involved in. It's outside the authority of any one state. So a state, remember, in geography just means a country or sovereign nation. So it's an idea or project or policy that a bunch of states get together and decide on, and then they give the power of that policy to somebody else. So it's like giving yourself you're voluntarily giving control away over you and a group of states over something. The best example of this and the precursor of the UN is the League of Nations. If you kind of watch this GIF, I hope it went. Of course it didn't. Okay, well, it's a really good GIF. Basically, the League of Nations is the precursor to the United Nations, and it was formed after World War I by our very own United States president, or Woodrow Wilson, and they said, hey, we don't want that to happen again. Let's all get together so that we can cooperate and talk and never have this kind of devastating war. But if this sweet GIF was working, what you would see is that slowly, one at a time, nations dropped out. In fact, if you saw the GIF, the biggest nations that drop out are Japan and then very quickly after Germany. And essentially what they're saying is, you can't tell us what to do anymore. We have no incentive to listen to you. They dropped out, and then it was one of the main factors and precursors of World War II is they lost the ability to communicate, cooperate. They were kind of being bullied by the League of Nations anyway. And that's the problem. That's the problem with these supranational organizations is their rules are very hard to enforce, especially when you're a nation like the United States. You'll notice the United States isn't part of the League of Nations, even though it was our idea. We weren't part of it. And so we pretty much did whatever we want to. Very, very USA-like mentality. I put this behind another slide. So, and that was the precursor to today's version of that. So World War II came along, and everyone kind of sat up in their chairs and realized that maybe we should follow through on some of these cooperation ideas. And so we founded the United Nations, or you might hear them referred to as the UN, or you might hear them referred to as blue hats. And the UN is a collection of almost every country. I'll show you a map on the next slide that'll show you that it's unlike the League of Nations, the United Nations is almost everybody. Now, if you're really interested, you can look at whether or not Palestine. Palestine is a member of the League of Nations. So if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole on that, definitely worth the time for a Wikipedia. But essentially, it provides a forum to discuss global problems. It minimizes conflict and promotes peace. And actually, the UN, oddly enough, even though it has a lot of issues, has been really, really effective about making people talk about their problems instead of just lobbing missiles at each other. It also really helps with economic disasters, which is sort of the new war. And they provide humanitarian relief in countries that maybe can't afford it. So this is a map of all the members of the United Nations. You can see that it's almost everyone with a few examples, boy, I should redo this video, but the bell's about to ring, so I'm not going to. With a few countries who aren't part of the League of Nations. Boy, you guys got a good teacher. So anyway, here's what the League of Nations is up to. And these are the things that you actually really want to write down. Some of the things they do: they provide food to over 90 million people in 75 countries who would not otherwise have food. They assist with refugee crises. In fact, if they didn't, nobody would. They are the people going around trying to help the refugees, trying to give them housing and food. They give vaccines to countries that can't have it. Remember, it's that spread of that of development. This happens through the United Nations. And one of the biggest things they've been doing is combating climate change, because, it's a problem that faces every country, and works with every single nation in the world except for a couple really big ones. And guess who is at the top of that list? That's right. The USA is one of the few people who've pulled out of the climate talks and said, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to keep doing whatever we want. They use diplomacy. They keep peace with, they have 120,000 soldiers and 16 operations on 4 different continents. They protect human rights. They do it all. And you should definitely write down a few of these examples before you move on to the next slide. Maybe pause this one. Here, just to kind of bring it to real life, are some of the refugee camps that the UN provides. If you see here, UNHCR, that's the UN's basically branch for human caring. I think it is humanitarian, whatever. It's a humanitarian branch, and they provide things to refugees like food, like shelter. See these giant bags. They will sometimes just drop these like bombs on cities. They'll just drop, take this peanut butter, take this thing, and they'll just ditch it over a impoverished nation. But here's what you really need to get after for the movie. And these are the blue hats. This is the UN's military fighting force, or police force, as they would call it. And the blue hats, the UN can authorize military actions, though they seldom do. In fact, what you'll see in the movie, or what you saw in the movie, is that the UN is incredibly hesitant to ever fire a gun or to do anything forceful. They're sent out on peacekeeping missions. And what's really important to know is that the UN gets its troops from all the nations within the UN who are willing to send troops. The US does not send a lot of troops to the UN. In fact, we hardly send any because we have such a powerful fighting force. We don't want to use that on the United Nations, because what if they tell us we can't do something, So the UN gets its troops from all the different member states, and they use those troops in peacekeeping operations. Here are 16 different operations. I mean, it's it looks like in Cyprus and Lebanon and Syria, India and Pakistan, Liberia, all over the place. They're sending these troops into places where aid is needed and protection is needed. So the question we're going to get to is, does it work? Is the United Nations an effective organization or not? There are lots and lots of huge failures in the United Nations history, and a lot of that because they really don't have any say over the large and powerful countries. The United States provides a majority of the funding for the United Nations, not a majority, a large portion of the funding. And so if they tell us not to do something, we might just pull out of the United Nations, and then what? So that's what we're going to talk about in class, how it could maybe be more effective and what we're going to do about it. And that's pretty much the end of your online lecture. Make sure that you've taken notes on this. Be prepared for a quiz, a spooky surprise for you tomorrow. It's a quiz. The spooky surprise is a quiz. So make sure you've listened to this. Have a good day. Happy Halloween. This is the most awkward part.